Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming with us. Welcome to our Facebook Live discussion this afternoon. Funding Fire and EMS Department Needs Through Rising Costs, brought to you by the National Volunteer Fire Council. My name is Dave Lewis, and I wear many hats, one of which is being an NVFC director from Maryland. I also serve as an emergency services instructor with the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute, an adjunct professor with the University of Maryland Global Campus, instructor for the National Fire Academy, and an active volunteer firefighter with the Odin, Maryland Volunteer Fire Company. Inflation and high price of fuel affect everyone, and the volunteer fire and EMS departments are no exception. Many departments are already operating on tight budgets, facing pandemic-related financial strain, and new solutions are urgently needed. Now, just a few weeks ago, I started a conversation on NVFC's Volunteer Voices on this topic. I want to thank those of you who have participated and encourage everyone else to continue the conversation after we have today's topic presentation. Today's conversation will focus on the challenges posed by the rising costs and what can be done to mitigate its effect. But before we jump into today's discussion, I'd like to have a few minutes to allow introductions from our other panelists. So Dave Denniston, if you want to take a moment to introduce yourself.
Sure will, Dave. Thanks and good afternoon. Dave Denniston. I'm the Director of Risk Management with ESIP. Also been in the fire EMS services for 30 plus years, past chief of the Cortlandville Fire Department in Central New York. Also served as president there, currently serving as chaplain. I'm a fire commissioner in the Virgil Fire District, sit on the Association of Fire Districts State of New York board as a regional director, and also serve as a deputy fire coordinator here in Cortland County. So great to be here.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for joining me this afternoon on this topic. We're expected to see Dana Cliff, but I don't see her on here. So maybe perhaps she's running just a few minutes behind, and we'll allow her to join us if she's able to come online. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. Today's discussion is scheduled to last for about an hour, depending on how many questions we receive. I have some questions that have been in front of me, but again, we'll also be taking questions from you, our audience. So I know Matt from NVFC will be monitoring the chat session there on the Facebook Live session. And if you have questions, please pop them up and we'll try to answer those to begin. So with that in mind, let's begin. I'll kind of come out with the first question here. Everyone's felt the impact of the inflation, but how are volunteer departments and emergency responders especially impacted by rising costs? And I'll just kind of start a little bit here, since what I found out from discussions that I've had with a lot of departments so far is that they're dealing with these issues by delaying programs, delaying purchasing, or taking funds from their reserves if they have them to cover the increased costs. But what I found more concerning is the out-of-pocket expenses by the individual volunteer members. Several of the discussions that we've had on the volunteer voices talked about, again, with many, especially when we get in our rural departments, depend on volunteer response from home. So volunteers are faced again with that added fuel cost, and for them to go to the station, to respond on calls, to take training, to go to meetings, whatever it might be, is an added cost of theirs. So it certainly is an impact, and hopefully we'll kind of address that a little bit. I'll give you one example of department and what they had. One of the ones that was given to me in the volunteer voices. Department stated that their fuel bill last month was $850. Their gas and electric bill was $1,500, and their insurance bill was $2,200. So without even looking at their other expenses, that's $44,550 per month. Or if you take that on a quarterly cost, it's $13,650. They also stated they get $11,500 per quarter from their county. Well, do the math. 11,000, don't pay $13,000 worth of bills. So that means a whole lot of fundraising or a lot of things that they got to do alternative just to stay even on those three expenses alone, not counting the other ones. What do you think about that, Dave?
I think we're in some very interesting times, Dave. And as you sit back and look and say, how did we get here? And obviously, it's easy to point to. They're now saying that the inflation rate, is about 8%, highest it's been since 1980 something. So that one jumps right out at you going, okay, all these things have gone up, but what's our budget done? Where do we stand as an organization? And this has all risen fairly rapidly, and a lot of us deal with we've got organizations out here that are part of an authority having jurisdiction. So they've got a set tax base rate that's coming in on a regular basis. And then, most of us are also volunteer organizations where we're doing some fundraising and have some funds of our own. So you got taxpayer dollars, you've got your own organization dollars, and all of them are being stretched thin at this point in time. So 8% is, I don't think any of us really planned for that, and we ended up in the boat that we're in. I think some other things have come together as well. So you've got all the effects of COVID, what that's done for organizations, and all of a sudden we were scrambling trying to find more personal protective equipment, whether it be gloves, masks, hand sanitizer, you name it. A lot of us went out and purchased all that by on our own at first. And then, some of the governments were able to come through with some help and offerings there. I know some other government entities, have tried to reimburse some agencies for some of those additional costs, but a lot of that we took head on right at the front. So, that had an immediate impact. But the other thing that I really see, is hammering this thing and making it even worse is the supply chain out there is in bad shape. You can't get the things that you used to be able to get. I know organizations that are, trying to replace a pickup truck or something else, and they can't get it. We've got, equipment out there that needs parts, and we can't get the parts either. And what that's done is, where you used to be able to get some discounts and breaks on some of that stuff, you're lucky if you can find a F4 350 at this point in time, let alone find one at a discount. So, a lot of the municipal contracts have been canceled, and folks are, having, if they can even find the materials or the rigs, they're having to pay pretty much full price for them. So, all of that compounded together, I think, has got us, kind of collectively gasping at this point in time, saying, oh my gosh, we are way out of line with where we thought we were going to be at this point in time. And it kind of snuck up on us. So I think that's where we're at.
You bring up some good points, Dave. Again, when we kind of look at the things, it's not just one single effect. It's not just the effect of the inflation that we're in, the supply chain issues, the COVID issues. All these things are just adding up and become the burden on the back, like you said, of many rural departments. I spent a lot of time working the three big grant programs, AFG, SAFER, and FP&S, and just look at some of the financial need statements on some of those departments. I mean, they barely, in some cases, I mean, they've had to dip into reserves. They've had to dip in their own pockets. It's a shame. It's a shame you go, to a small volunteer department and they end up, passing the hat at a company meeting just to have enough money to pay the electric bill.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think, Dave, you and I just got back from, the board meeting in Washington. And one of the things that really stood out to me at that as well was just, we had some frank discussions on what the price of Firematic gear has done, whether it be apparatus, what the value of apparatus was even 4 or 5 years ago compared to what it is today, turnout gear, air packs, you name it. It seems like all of that stuff is just kind of gone through the roof. And now, the inflation and the supply chain issues are just, making that incredibly high. And here we are.
And do you have any examples, Dave, where your department itself has been affected by the inflation and how you felt and what actions you've had to take in your own department?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were surprised when we started, and probably none of us should have been, but like I said, I think this kind of snuck up on a lot of us. But, all of a sudden we had budgeted and, we're going to buy 10 sets of turnout gear this year. And then you start looking at what that increase in price has done. And, maybe to stick with the budget, you can't buy 10 sets. Maybe you're only looking for 8 sets. Fuel has gone right out of sight. And, that's one good thing about fire and emergency services is like tires on the trucks. We very rarely ever wear them out because they just don't get that much mileage. But, same thing with our main fleet apparatus. We're not using a ton of fuel, but when it's costing, a lot more than it was 1 or 2 years ago to fill those trucks up, certainly that all starts to add up. So, while our main fleet is, we don't have that many miles and stuff. If you start looking at chief's vehicles or any of those things within a department, I think those are the ones that are really going to catch up on you in a hurry because you are putting some big mileage on those so that, every time you go to the pump, that kind of adds up. So, as you mentioned, earlier, the utility prices have gone up, the fuel prices have gone up. We've seen a huge increase, and we thought we were doing a good job at conserving energy at the station, but our electric bill was going out of sight. So we started looking, going, what do we got? Where are we wasting electricity? And we're going back and look at the amount of kilowatt hours that we're using, and they're the same or less, but the bill has really skyrocketed and gone up. Insurance prices, like you said, they're going up because if an insurance company has to replace something that needs replacing, it's costing them a lot more to do it. So that's the problem with inflation, and these things start going, is it's not one single thing. So we just can't say, well, fuel price has gone up and we got to deal with that. When you've got the inflation taking off at the rates that it is right now, it's everything, and then it just starts compounding itself. We ordered pizza a couple weeks ago for a training, and we were kind of shocked at the bill, but then we thought about it, and I had conversations with the local folks that own the pizza shop, and they were telling me the price of their flour has gone up, the price of their pepperoni's gone up, the price of their wings has gone up, and they said we've just passed along a small portion of what, and we're trying to eat some of that, but they go, we can't sit here and not do anything. And you can't blame them either. I mean, they can't be in business or stay in business if they're not making any money either. So, it's just right now you're getting hit on all fronts, and that's where it's really starting to add up quick.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're here partly to talk about fuel costs, but it's a lot more than that. And I kind of was looking at that the other day when I was kind of thinking about some things. Our state association, the Maryland State Firemen's Association, we hold our annual conference and convention every June, and we close out that event with a large parade, where we have departments, hopefully from across the state send apparatus down. And we, I can remember back in the 80s, that parade would go on for about 6 hours. There would be so much apparatus down there. Today, we're lucky if we go 2, and it's really less than 2. And in fact, we're probably one of the few state organizations in our area that even have a parade anymore. Pennsylvania, Delaware, Virginia, they've all cut their parades out. And I kind of, well, part of it's a culture, I guess, because parades don't hold the same glory and the excitement that they did when I was a younger member. But the fact that we look at it, I look at it from my department to go to Ocean City, where our convention is. It's a 240-mile round trip. And so if I take a fire engine that's getting 5 miles per gallon and diesel fuel is surpassing $5 per gallon, that's about a $250 cost for my department. So, I had to ask myself, if I'm one of the department leaders, do I have the budget excess that says I could spend $250 to go down the parade, and I'm sure that's what's happening, across everywhere. Parades are a luxury and not a necessity. And those are one of the things that in many areas they're dropping out. Even in my own department, we're getting ready to have our annual carnival, and we haven't had a carnival in 2 years because of COVID, and we're bringing it back. And actually 3 years ago, the last time we did have it, we cut the parade out, mainly because our area has grown up and we were creating such a traffic mess. But part of it too was less departments coming out and participating. And we're making plans this year, but we're carnival, but no parade in the same way. So those are decisions that have to be made. Do we go to a parade, or do we buy that broken section of hose?
Right. And you hit the nail on the head too when you said we've got pent up demand. So we haven't been able to do these things for 2 years. So right now, when somebody says, hey, we're going to have our parade this year, everybody gets excited and like, yeah, we're going to go. Maybe one of those things that we'd started to see some decrease in participation over the years because people haven't been able to do it. Now they want to do it, and now we got to sit there and go, yeah, but we don't know how many vehicles we can send. We don't, we've got to look at the cost of this whole thing and what that looks like. So it's, again, we're just kind of getting clobbered from all different angles, and I think that's what's really starting to hurt.
Right. Yeah. And several of the departments that that I've had a chance to talk to feel that they're fortunate because they actually get their fuel from local government sources. So while the local government's getting the pinch of the impact of the cost there, those departments says, well, we're not really feeling the cost of the fuel, although in some cases it's kicked back against as a deficit to their budget. So it does affect them. But more importantly to them is, as you mentioned, the rising cost of materials, goods, and services still are requiring many departments to make choices.
Right. And I think, even if some of those aren't hitting immediately, and you've got some of those kind of relationships with your local municipalities, they're feeling the pinch as well. And that's what we got to understand is it's not just us, it's everybody. It's your taxpayers, it's your municipalities, it's everybody else that's in this ball game. And, there's only X number of tax dollars to go around. So even if we aren't directly paying for that fuel, I think we want to be pretty conservative with it and say, how do we keep it that way? We've had a lot of, fire service organizations have had a pretty good ride over the years, whether it be from their municipalities kicking in fuel, or maybe it's their, workers' comp coverage or other things that the municipalities have been able to pick up. And, you kind of look at that and you go, it's still coming from the taxpayers. So it's all coming from the same place. So it all works and is good. But as the belt starts tightening everywhere, people are going to start questioning some of those things. So I think we want to be really careful not to abuse them at this point, to the point where we lose it altogether. So.
Absolutely. So we've kind of painted a little bit of doom and gloom there. Let's kind of brainstorm here for a couple of minutes, Dave. What can you and I offer some of these departments in terms of, solutions or workarounds that maybe we can push out to them? Maybe some grant opportunities, other funding opportunities. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's some of those out there, and we can talk about what some of those are. But I think the first step has got to be for an organization, especially, the rural local fire department, if that's not the authority having jurisdiction, but it's, more of the group of members, if you will, that come together to do the job. A lot of them over the years really haven't been real good with budgets. So the municipality will have a budget, they know what the tax basin is and all that. But when you get down to the department level itself, a lot of them are like, well, we'll spend whatever we take in and go from there. I think it's really a time, if you haven't done it at this point, is you got to sit down and you got to look at your budget. You got to look at, what do we spend on average a year? What do we take in on average a year? If we're doing fundraisers, what does that look like for us? Again, to bring it on a whole nother point, as inflation raises and your consumers and your taxpayers, pocketbook gets smaller and smaller, are they going to be able to contribute to you like they have in the past? So I think not only do you want to look at and consider the rising costs, you probably better figure that you may not be able to take in as much money as you did in the past. So, how do you build that into the equation? But by having that budget and understanding, where does my money come from? Where is my money going? And then, how do I deal with that? It gives you can start asking some of those tough questions. What does this event cost? What is this thing that I want to purchase cost? What is this, whatever it is that I'm looking at cost? And then where's that money going to come from to pay for it? And I think you also want to be considering, even though inflation has raised at the rate, going back to that whole local pizza shop conversation, they've absorbed as much of this as they could over time. But there's going to come a point where they got to look at their margins and going, we can't exist like this anymore. So we're going to have to raise prices even more. So, there's some early indicators out there that maybe this inflation thing is starting to slow down and, maybe correct itself a little bit. But I think there's even more of it to come in these people that really haven't figured out what their true costs are. Maybe they're just sitting down and doing their tax returns, for last year, going, ooh, last year wasn't a really great year for us. What do we got to do? How we got to increase our prices? But by having that budget, understanding where your money comes from, where your money goes, it allows you to, start looking at this and making some of those decisions on, are we going to send 2 trucks to the parade that's 250 miles away, or we got to keep that a little bit closer to home? Have conversations with your authority having jurisdiction. Hey, what do you folks think our budget's going to look like from your end next year? A lot of us deal with the 2% insurance money, and that's always a gamble because we don't have any idea what's going to, come in, and we have some really good years with that and other years that aren't so great. So, but planning, having those conversations, looking at those type of things and making sure that we understand what we've got and where it's going, I think is a big first step.
Absolutely. And you bring up some great points, Dave. We say Dave, and we got Dave and Dave show here. Run the volunteer fire department is running a small business, and it's for most of us, it's a multi-million-dollar business. By the time you take the value of your capital assets, the apparatus, your building, and then take your operational piece on top of it, it's a multi-million-dollar business. And And it really does take, other than the person that gets the highest number of votes to run the company, but somebody who's most equipped. And that's where many of our departments struggle. And I see that as I go across the United States, and I get an opportunity to talk to them, and I teach different classes, and maybe we don't do as good a job as we should. And NVFC's tried to put out some different training programs to kind of prepare volunteer department leaders to how do you work a budget, and how do you work a budget? How do you understand what should be in your bylaws, and a lot of things like that. And it truly is a leadership challenge out there that is causing us to suffer. So yeah.
I think the leadership's a huge part of it. And, people that are with us that, maybe are looking or aspiring to become leaders. I thought I was prepared to be a leader when I started down that path in the organization, and I quickly realized I know how to put out fires. I know how to cut cars apart. I know how to pull somebody out of a raging river. I didn't have any training whatsoever on a budget. And, as you hit the nail right on the head, you look at a lot of our department treasurers or presidents or some of those things. These are people that don't even balance their own checkbook or have any idea whether they can pay their bills at the end of the month. And now we've got them in charge of these multi-million-dollar organizations, and dealing with things like depreciation and replacement plans and things they've never done. So hats off to the NVFC for trying to forward some of that level of training, because I really don't think it exists out there at the level that it needs to. So
yeah. And I see some of the departments I kind of had a chance to talk to are actually looking at some type of benefit program for their members. And again, looking at the members and the fact that the members are increasing the cost, whether it be fuel or whether it be uniforms, whatever it might be, so, some type of stipend program, some type of reimbursement program. Some of this to some effect you can do under the SAFER grant if you write it right. It can't be to buy gas, but it can be, reimbursement for personal expenses. Kind of a sticky line there sometimes between stipends and reimbursements, or are you paying them? And, because when you start paying them for service or pay on call type things, then you have to face those tax issues. So I think those are good things, because, we all recognize too that we've got a recruitment and retention problem. And if we have departments that had to make a choice whether they put food on the table or whether they go to the firehouse, they're going to put food on the table. And so so we got to think about what can departments do to kind of help their members. At the same time, they're struggling as a department. What can we do for the members in order to kind of help facilitate those recruitment and retention efforts?
Yeah, and you bring up the SAFER grants, and I think that's a great avenue for funding, and maybe underutilized in some cases. But as you're doing it, it does two things for you. Number one, it may bring some additional funding to the organization, but number two, once you sit down and start looking at that application, it forces you to take a good hard look at where you are and what you got coming in, and what your needs are going to be. And now you've got to justify it to somebody else. So at least you're putting some of that type of thing together. You mentioned people trying to decide, am I going to put fuel in my vehicle to run these calls, or am I going to put groceries on the table? As we look at recruitment and retention, and there's some really good philosophies and programs out there where people are starting to look, how do we respond on a volunteer basis? And for years and years and years, it was every time the pager trips, you jump in the car and you race to the station. We started seeing some burnout and things of that nature. So what some people have started to do is going to a shift, if you will. So certain people are on duty, if you will, certain days, and they come down. And a lot of departments have really found that that's helped them. The volunteer fire service has always amazed me that when that pager trips, somehow, some way, we've got enough people in town that seem to show up and get the job done. You couldn't run any other business the way we run the volunteer fire service, but it's amazing. I go, how do we know who's in town, out of town? I just saw an email this morning that we know that we're going to have a bunch of members out of town this weekend. So if everybody else could kind of step up, that would be helpful as well. But if you start looking at some of these shifts, what that does is, now it has people coming, that somebody's going to show up when the thing goes off, who's in town and who's not in town. If somebody can't make their shift, then they're responsible for getting somebody else in the department to cover it for them. But the other thing it does is it keeps everybody from jumping in their car and running down there. So now maybe we're making fewer trips to the fire department, And we're saving a couple bucks on gasoline there as well. So we're saving burnout. We know who's coming, and we're saving extra trips to the station when maybe we got more people coming than we really need. When you talk to some people about that shift type setup, some of them go, well, then, people aren't going to come at all. And just because you have shifts doesn't mean that if somebody isn't available, if somebody doesn't think that they've got some expertise, or somebody happens to be in the area and available, that they're not invited to come and be part of that as well. So I think you want to get out of the mindset that only those people on the shift can show up. But what you'll find is a whole lot more efficiency in how the organization runs and what it does with its members. But that again is another thing that maybe we really should be looking at as an organization, going, could this help us out, especially in this situation?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, there's some calls we only need 4 people. We don't need 12 to show up, and we don't need to send 2 fire engines, a rescue squad, and a ladder truck because Mrs. Smith fell on the floor and we got to pick her up. So a lot of departments are looking at that. They're looking at limiting the number of units that respond to a single incident. Certainly, if the first arriving unit gets there and they need help, they could call for it. Now, put my incident commander, my fire chief hat on. I kind of hate to see that because of delayed response there, but looking at it from an economic issue, we probably need to have more discretion on the response level, to those more routine calls. And I also see that a lot of departments are looking at, again, because of the fuel costs, using smaller response vehicles, either utility vehicles or chase vehicles, to go on those kind of routine calls, that we don't necessarily need to send, a $500,000 fire engine or $1 million ladder truck on every little call. So we're really kind of looking at that in terms of, how can we kind of cut our expenses there. And I see that with a lot of departments.
And you and I both know, Dave, that there's 2 things that firefighters hate. One is the way things are, and the other is change. But
Absolutely.
I think we got to understand this isn't the same fire service it was when we joined. This isn't the same fire and EMS services that it was 5 years ago. Things are different. Our societies are different. Our economy is different. So we've really got to make some tough decisions and some changes if we're going to survive, because otherwise the recruitment and the retention is not going to get any better. Our budgets are not going to get any better, and we're going to be in tough shape. So if we aren't already.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had a fellow that was president of my fire company just a few years ago, and he had a proposal actually for us to build a quick response vehicle as our next piece of apparatus. And boy, he got shot down big. No, we replace that fire engine with another fire engine, but we're not going to go with something smaller and quicker. Although, again, for a lot of our responses, that would have been the ideal situation. And that was before fuel costs got where they are today.
Right. For years and years, we had a specialty engine, a specialty tanker, tender for our friends out on the West Coast, but we'll call them tankers here on this side. Specialty rescue trucks and all those kind of things. And as a board, when we start looking at new vehicles, our last 2 have been pumper tankers. So we can do the same job. Number one, I got less people to drive them, but as you said, now I've got less fuel cost, I've got less maintenance and repairs and all those type of things. So we've got to become a little leaner with some of those decisions. And what we're finding is, we can do just as good a job. And sometime if we've got everything on one vehicle, we can even do a better job, because now, with one driver and one crew, I've got 2,000 gallons of water and a pump and everything I need to do a pretty quick knockdown. I haven't got to wait and go, geez, did that second driver show up to bring the tanker, so that I've got the water that I need on the scene. So.
Yeah, I actually saw one at a fire show a few years back that actually was a ladder truck, but it had a pretty substantial water tank onto it in addition. So it was I don't know whether you call it a squenging or struck. I don't know what you call that.
Jeez, don't get Tom Miller involved in this conversation.
yeah. We don't. No, Tom Miller's not here, so we won't get him. But, one of the things we did talk about was the grant programs, and it certainly, I would highly encourage departments to look at the grant opportunities. We talk about, the rising costs of things, and I'm surprised, really, having been involved with the grant programs now for 18 years, both as a peer reviewer and writing some for my own department. the departments that don't invest the time. Now, I understand some of the process can be complicated, and maybe it's a little bit of frustration, like you said. It makes them, maybe it opens their eyes up to things that they aren't doing in terms of strategic planning and doing an honest needs assessment of what they need. But the money is there, and the departments just aren't taking advantage of what their greatest needs are.
And I think, for years, a lot of folks, they looked at the grant program and gone, they threw a flyer out there going, geez, we'd really like one of these. I don't know if we really need it or not, or it's important, but if we can get it from a grant, then we'll end up getting it, instead of looking at what are your true needs. And if you've got that need and you can justify that need, you can have a pretty good success rate on those grants as well. So it does take some time. It takes some coordination. You've either got the people in-house that can build that for you and put it together, or in most areas, you've got somebody locally that you can lean on to help with, putting the grant programs together. And there's resources out there to help get you through that process. So just because you did it a couple times and you weren't successful, ask yourself, were we not asking for the right things? Did we really not put as much energy and effort into this as we needed to? And, go ahead and take another swing at it, because as budgets get tighter, any of that kind of funding is going to become more and more important to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, having been involved with the grant program, quite a bit, and we just went through the last review cycle. I look at closely when I read the narratives people write. Are they justifying it based on need and not just based upon it'd be nice to have because FEMA's throwing out $300 million, then I want a piece of that. Well, you're not going to get a piece of it, and under my scoring anyway, unless you really justify those needs.
And there too, if you can, a lot of people, they'll go for the big dollar item. Well, if I can get some of these smaller dollar items, that'll give me that other money to free up that I was going to, so if I'm going to spend money on air packs or turnout gear anyway, if I can work that in and put that through a grant, now I've got that money that I was going to spend on those to put toward that piece of apparatus. So,
absolutely,
don't just go after the biggest dollar in the sky. Go after what you really need and can really justify for the organization.
Yeah, and I often tell people that when I get out and do some of the grant training that I do, because a lot of people going right after the fire engines and tankers and ladder trucks, and when you take that that $300 million and you can only spend 25% of it on vehicles, you're only talking about $70 million. Well, $70 million spread out across the United States doesn't buy many fire engines, ladder trucks, and tankers. And you're right. Maybe think about your priorities, that maybe go after the stuff that is a higher priority, and I don't want to say less competitive, but there's a bigger pot of money in the AFG program, such as turnout gear and SCBA and things like that, and put your money towards your apparatus. So.
Yep. I know another thing that we've had a lot of success with in this area is the regional type grants. So, go in with your neighbors on something that you all need. And that's another way that we can save some dollars as well, is start looking at these buying co-ops, or even partner with your neighbors. If your department needs 10 sets of turnout gear and your neighbor needs 10, and the next neighbor needs 10, and the third or fourth neighbor needs 10, now all of a sudden you've got enough in dollar numbers there to get some manufacturer's attention, and maybe they're going to give you some better breaks and discounts if you're buying X number of sets. So too many times we're stuck with our pride. We're stuck with, geez, I want my turnout coat to come from this company and be this color and have this trim and this lettering and all that kind of stuff. We got to get beyond some of that stuff and going, is there some synergy, and is there some reasons why, if we pool together as a group, we can get a lot more efficient and get some better pricing out there as well. And then you put that all together and you put it in for a regional type grant. And, we've found that, I know you've reviewed a ton of them, and maybe you can share some information on that as well, but we seem to have had better luck when there's 4 or 5 of us going together for one common good.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've strongly advocated the regional grant approach, because, a lot of happens when you look at the grant. You're looking at, call volume, population served, area served. In many rural departments, that's a small number of people and a small number of calls. But if I put 10 of you together, that's a much broader area, a lot more people served, bigger bang for the buck. And I can tell you that I've advocated that, and we've had a lot of success in Maryland in my rural. When I get to Western Maryland or the Eastern Shore of Maryland, where it is largely rural, of getting those departments, 5, 8, 10 departments, putting together a regional request and putting those together, and they've been highly successful. So.
Yeah, even, and you can take that even beyond the whole grant concept is, just pool buying in general. We mentioned fuel and the rising cost of fuel. Well, look at how many gallons of fuel you need for your department and your organization. Well, now all your neighbors need fuel as well. And last time I checked, those snow plows and garbage trucks and police cars and everything else that either the local municipality or even at a county level, can you work together with your county to have, to build some buying power? So now instead of saying, hey, we need, 10,000 gallons of fuel a year, I can go in there and say, we need 200,000 gallons of fuel a year. Somebody want to give us a little better break on that. And you're more apt to find somebody that's willing to work with you in those quantities.
Yeah, you're absolutely. I mean, maybe there's some opportunities to tap on the buying contract that maybe the municipality has and get their rate as opposed to a standard commercial rate. There are also several national fire organizations with group purchasing authority that do a lot of the legwork on a lot of these things too. And we probably don't take advantage of those. We've heard about a couple of those through the NVFC, and try to get those information out with those group purchasing organizations that have actually gone out and negotiated a price. So
yeah, I've seen a lot of those very successful when you start talking about gasoline, diesel fuel, those type of things. But I've even seen some success there when they're pooling together to buy electricity. And now we can buy electricity in bigger chunks. So don't forget about those other municipal type things out there. Are you getting your local internet and cable coverage? Are you paying that directly to the provider, or are you getting that through your town or your county where these people have to work with them in order to get the license to work in the area anyway? So again, make sure that you're talking with your fellow organizations, your fellow departments, but also your municipalities around. Go to your town boards, go to your county boards and say, hey, is there anything that we can do to work together to try to get some better pricing on some of this stuff?
Yeah, and the other thing is too, don't forget the smaller grant opportunities too. All of your big box stores like your Walmart, your Home Depot, your Lowe's, all those store managers have the authority and actually responsibility to some degree from corporate to contribute to local charitable needs. So maybe it's time to go knock on the door and talk to the manager of your local Walmart store and say, hey, what can you do for us in terms of, let's just say, paper goods, paper towels, toilet paper, stuff like that. It's a small impact to them, but it's a savings to us. And again, an opportunity for us to reduce some of our budgetary impacts.
We've had some success with that locally, with some of the grocery stores. Will they supply us with bottled water? Will they supply us with paper products? You talk about inflation and everything going up. If you've got somebody coming in to clean the station, their fees are going to go up if they're the ones that are supplying the toilet paper and all those kind of things, because they're paying more for them. So can you work out some kind of deal with one of the local grocery stores to feel good for them? And, here they're helping the community. We've also found too that the more we can tell somebody what we're looking for. So, there's some pros and cons and some thoughts out there. There's some, volunteer organizations and some folks that go, geez, these people are already giving of their time and their expertise to go save somebody in their community. And yet we're asking them to go do fundraising as well. They shouldn't be doing fundraising. And then there's other people out there that'll say, the fundraising is a big part of the camaraderie and the community feel as anything else. So, I know there's folks that, both agree and disagree with whether we should be fundraising at all. But if we're going to be fundraising, let's do that smart as well. And if we can tell the public what we're trying to purchase, instead of just saying, hey, we're having our annual calendar drive or pancake breakfast or chicken barbecue or whatever, show them the need. Hey, we would like to purchase a new set of rescue tools, or we would like to purchase a specialty rescue vehicle, or we would like to purchase one of these things. Now the people can see what they're contributing towards and the money's going towards. They're more apt to be part of that goal. You've probably seen in towns where they they come up with a project and they say, we got to have, $250,000. And they got the thermometer painted in the middle of town where every time they get another $10,000, they're painting a new line on that thing. Again, now you're more in people's face and they realize what it is that you're looking for and trying to do. So, as you're fundraising, have some direct things that you're going to spend that money on. Yeah, we want to tell our story that we're paying more for fuel and pizza and paper products and all those kind of things. But, sometimes a community member then sits there and goes, yeah, I'm paying more money for all those stuffs myself. I can't help you guys out when I can't help myself. But if you can show them what it is you're looking for, I think that can be very beneficial for you. The other thing with our fundraisers is when we look at what we charge a lot of times, and departments are getting better at this, but you still got organizations that are out there having pancake breakfast and they're charging, people $3.50 to come to breakfast. And then they're giving them sausage and bacon and all these other things. You go, hey, can we do the math on this thing? Because we're losing money on every one of these that we do. We're not making any money. And, we don't want to raise prices or be that person, but it comes to a point where you better figure out exactly what your costs are in that chicken that you're barbecuing and selling out there. How much is a half is it going to cost you? What's your labor worth? What's the time worth of the people that are doing it? And then, what's it worth to the consumer? What could they go down to the grocery store and buy it for? And I don't think there's any reason that we shouldn't have a little higher price than what they're going to go pay someplace else for it. Because again, they're doing that as a donation. But, I kind of chuckle when an organization doesn't have their prices set high enough. And, somebody comes down there and says, well, I'm helping out my local fire department because I just bought 2 of your $3.50 chickens. And I'm sitting there thinking they cost $5. You didn't help the fire department at all. So
Right.
make sure on those fundraisers that you're sitting down, putting the pen to paper and figuring out what your actual costs are. And it's not just a chicken. No, we got to talk about the charcoal. We got to talk about the paper bag that we're putting it in. We got to talk about all the cleaning utensils and supplies that we had to buy. We got to talk about any, extra cleaning that we may need at the station, those kind of things, and really figure out your cost before you set your prices.
Yeah, absolutely. And fundraising is certainly, when we talk about rising costs, what are we doing? And for many of us, fundraising was on a complete halt for 2 years, or a better part of 2 years. Like I said, my own department, we didn't have a carnival for 2 years, and that's a significant hit to our budget, for 2 years. I mean, we had to, dip heavily into some reserve funding that we had because of not having carnival for 2 years. But we got to figure out how do we do it and how do we do it smarter. And I think, you're right, $3 for a pancake breakfast that it cost us $6 to make, we're losing money for everyone. And a big part of that's marketing, and, when we're out doing this fundraising, and we try to do that in my own department, kind of make people understand what do we need, how much it's going to cost, and why we need their support. We have a long tradition of making do with what we got and not asking for a handout. But we got to learn to beg a little bit more, I guess.
But we got to realize too. My grandfather's still going to come up and he's going to gripe about the price that he's paying. Well, I remember when we used to pay 25 cents for this breakfast. Yeah. Well, how much did that car cost you, Gramp? And where's that price gone to? So don't get discouraged when some people balk a little bit at that pricing. There was some good things that came out of COVID, and out of all the terrible things that we've seen from it. A lot of departments were forced to go from their traditional spaghetti dinner, chicken barbecues, those kind of things where people came in and ate, to more of a drive-through type atmosphere. And, some of them figured out, hey, we can do this a little cheaper than we were doing it before, because we haven't got the cost of the tablecloths and the cost of the paper plates and the forks and the knives and all that kind of stuff. So, just because we can get back together now, don't lose sight of some of those things that made you some pretty decent money during COVID. The other thing that COVID did for us is that, it really, here we are on Facebook Live and Zoom and all those type of things. Those weren't very successful before COVID. And some people have really realized that, now we can get training from experts across the country and things that we couldn't afford to bring in-house before or send our people to. Now it's out there. So make sure you're looking to see what's available in this type of training, what's available in this type of format. Now I can deliver some really great things to my members at a lot, less expense as well. Here's another place to just, save on that budget and trim some expenses.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the other thing, coming back to our, whole recruitment retention challenge is that there needs to be a needs analysis there. What kind of people do we need? And too often as departments, we only want people that want to ride fire trucks and ambulances. Well, we got a whole administrative side of our business. And there are a lot of people out there that some of them are retired and looking for opportunities. And we brought several of them into my own department, been very successful. We talk about these grant programs. Well, average Joe firefighter shouldn't write a grant application, but maybe there's somebody in your community that can. Not everybody needs to go out and hire a grant writer. There are some good grant writers, and I can tell you there's some bad grant writers out there.
Yep.
And they're chopping down, $500, $1,000 a pop to write you an AFG grant, and you get turned down. You wonder why I get turned down. I paid to have this done. So, again, that's part of what you need to do in terms of looking at who you want to hire, and look at their references and talk to the other departments and find out, were they good for them? Were they were successful in getting what they needed? So, we kind of look at those administrative members, and, kind of do the same thing on the fundraising. We've tried to, gain some administrative members in our department, mainly to take the fundraising side off of our operational members, because my guys and gals are running a lot of calls. And then we kept on top of that, we tapped with them responsibility. Hey, I need you to work Carnival. I need you to work food truck events. I need you to work these kind of events. I need you to pancake breakfasts. And they say, well, gee, I didn't join the fire department to do that.
And you got, you bring up a great point. You got people out there in your community that want to help, but maybe they don't want to drag hose. Maybe they don't want to drive, 80,000 pound trucks. I don't know why anybody wouldn't want to do that, because it's just the greatest thing in the world. But, here's an opportunity to have them help. Maybe you've got to restructure your membership classes, and, don't tell somebody that wants to come in and write grant applications for you, oh, by the way, you got to sit through 24 hours of OSHA training a year. That's probably not going to work either. So you got to look at all those. I see a comment over here in the comment box. Are you tapped into your local community foundations? And again, start looking for additional sources of funding. The community foundations are great. A lot of us also have community service organizations, whether it be Kiwanis clubs, Rotary clubs, all of those kind of things. And they're always looking for speakers to come in. They usually have a meeting once a week or once a month. They're looking for a speaker to come in. Go in and do your fire safety program. Go in there and talk to those folks, and then go in there as you do that and explain to them what your needs are. Hey, we would really like this additional piece of equipment. We haven't got a way to do it. And all of a sudden their wheels start turning. And that's what a lot of them exist for, is to make money or to donate money to the community. Well, I just as soon have them donating it to the local fire department as, one of the other things in town that they might contribute to. So make sure you understand who's in your community for community foundations, what the application process looks like for them, but then these service clubs as well. Can you tap into some of those? We've had successes with some of those, running fundraising events, whether it be a road rally or a barbecue or some event. They have a really good time at it. They're making money. They're meeting their mission. And we as a fire department are making out real well on those as well. So
we got probably about 10 more minutes left. Let's put our crystal ball. Let's look in our crystal ball here for a minute. What do we think is, what relief might be in sight for our volunteer departments and the responders relative to inflation? What's your perspective on that crystal ball?
My crystal ball, unfortunately, is pretty cloudy at this point in time. I think the worst is yet to come. I think we've only really scratched the surface. I think a lot of us have absorbed some of this. You mentioned earlier, by dipping into reserves, by maybe selling some stuff that we really weren't using all that much anymore. I think we're going to need to do more of that. I really think, again, we've got to sharpen our pencils. We got to make sure we got a budget. We got to make sure we know what we're spending it on, and where that money's coming from. And I personally think, it's going to get a little worse than it gets better. You're looking at what the stock market's doing right now. You're looking at even what the bond market is doing. And now we're seeing increased, interest rates and things like that. That's going to hurt some of that as well. As we go to bond now for a new fire station, or we got a bond for a new piece of apparatus, we're going to pay higher interest rates as we do that. So I don't see it getting better quick. Like I said, there's some leading indicators out there that maybe are suggesting that things are starting to slow down a little bit. Boy, I hope they're slowing down, because we were headed in a real bad place real quick. Hopefully we're at least starting to level off a little bit, but I think it's going to be a while before we see things as favorable as they were, pre-COVID or during the first little bit of COVID.
Yeah, I think, if we look at the economic outlook, I mean, it's cloudy, I guess, at best, like I think you said, but I think it comes back to our earlier discussions that the departments need to have a strategic assessment of where they are and where they're going to be and how they're going to get there. When I was president of my fire company just a few years ago, we developed a long-term strategic plan, and it really was built upon what I call was 4 pillars of our foundation. One was our membership, one was our financial base, one was our capital assets, apparatus, facilities, and things like that, and the other one was our community and government support. And we need all 4 of those to be strong to hold up. Those are the 4 pillars of our foundation, that we need to have people. So we had to do a strong assessment of where we are in terms of how many members do we have, how many members do we think we're going to have 5 years now, 10 years from now, and will we have to make changes relative to maybe at some point bringing in career staffing or whatnot to supplement the loss of volunteers. The financial base, where are we? And again, the economists say, we got to have that reserve funding. And as you said, most departments, they put the money in the checkbook and they'll spend it until they have no more in the checkbook, instead of taking some of that out and put in the reserve accounts to help them ride through that. Any of us that have invested in any type of retirement program know, we put it in some of these funds that are very, very vulnerable in these times. But they'll tell you, you got to ride them out. The worst thing you could do is look at what the Dow Jones does every day, because you'll drive yourself insane. You got to ride it out and hope and pray that there are better times ahead. And I think we all know that, we all think and we all pray there will be better times ahead.
So you tell me I'm not the only one that's got those statements sitting down on my kitchen table that I haven't even dared open yet. So.
No, look at him. I just did my tax return Sunday.
Dave, and a little plug for NVFC and the state organizations that are out there as well. A lot of expertise there, a lot of help there. You mentioned volunteer voices earlier. I read that thing, every morning. That's one of the first things I grab onto and look at that. And, some of it's to see if I can answer a question for somebody else, but some of it I find is questions that I had that I didn't even know I had yet. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's a great question, and you look at the response that you're getting. So, by being more involved with organizations like NVFC, like your, State Firemen's Association, Fire, People's Associations, look at what they can offer, look at suggestions, talk to other people. It's all about networking. If you're having the question, probably other people are having the same question. So, look at what other folks are doing in the same situation, and then get ideas and go, hey, and as I read through those responses, I'm going, yeah, it's a really good question. And yeah, that response would work for us. Maybe that response won't work for us, but doesn't mean that the next 2 or 3 might not. So, really make sure you're tapped into those organizations and the expertise and the help that's there.
Absolutely. And I would encourage our viewers to take advantage of volunteer voices. I mean, that was, something that NVFC come up with, to kind of have that open dialogue discussion. And like I said, and NVFC asked, kind of put this thing together a couple of weeks ago. That was the first thing I did, was kind of put that question out there. So I had some feedback to kind of work from, other than my own, on what some departments are doing relative to that. We also had those discussions last week, as you mentioned, that NVFC just had our spring meeting. We talked about this whole, fiscal and inflation area. And part of our concern was looking at the history of the Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program, that those funding levels really have not significantly changed over the history of the program, but yet the cost of everything have, in some cases, doubled, tripled, or even more. So therefore, the purchasing power of that $300 million is a lot less today than it was in 2005, let's just say 20 years ago, less than 20 years ago. So that means that purchasing power is less. That means, there's fewer grants being awarded because they're higher value. So it made us take a hard look at it at our meetings this past weekend, and, hopefully puts together some some point papers that we can point to our congressional and Senate leaders to say, hey, this grant program's good, but we're really not getting what we hope to get out of it because of inflationary factors. So,
we got to meet the new fire administrator, and just that I was really amazed at her enthusiasm and some of the thoughts that she has moving forward. But she stressed to us as well, we need to make sure we're heard. So it's we belong to these organizations, we're part of them, but we also need to make sure that our voices are being heard. And when you see a request come out to contact your local officials, you got to pick up the phone and do that. You got to send them an email. You got to do whatever. But we got to make some noise. We got to make sure that they know we're here. We know what our plight is. We're doing amazing things, and it's tough that sometimes we got to fight, to get the funding that we get for it. But I think we've got to do a better job, kind of rallying the troops sometimes and getting some of that stuff done.
Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes left, so I'll give you any closing thoughts or comments, Dave.
Yeah, we started right out talking about the negative and the woe is us and how bad things are, but I think it's important that we do understand things have changed and things are going to be a little tougher. And I don't think it's anything that we can't get through. We've gotten through several of these type events in the past, but it's going to take some work. We got to roll up our sleeves. We got to really focus on what is our true mission, what's our value, and what can we do for the community, and then make sure that we're telling the story as well.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, we've been through tough times, and we'll get through this one. And I think the main thing is that we work together and help each other out. And again, NVFC has resources, and will continue to have the resources available to help people out. So, I certainly want to thank you, Dave, for kind of joining with me as we did this live event. I think we had a great discussion about the inflationary effects on the volunteer emergency services and some things that they might want to think about in order to mitigate those effects.
It's always enjoyable. It's always enjoyable spending some time with you, my friend.
Absolutely. I also want to thank the National Volunteer Fire Council for putting together today's discussion. For those that don't know, the NVFC is a leading nonprofit membership organization representing the interests of volunteer fire, EMS, and rescue services. We have resources, training, advocacy, and programs to help you, the volunteers, thrive. Again, you can learn more about NVFC as well as access those resources at our website, www.nvfc.org. And if you're not a member, I want to encourage you to join. $21 a year, has a large number of benefits, has a $10,000 insurance policy, gives you access to volunteer voices, some of our online training that's members only, some members only resources. And we do have 2 significant training events a year. Just this June, we'll be down in Orlando, Florida with the Health and Safety Summit. And through grant money that we've been able to receive, we can offer travel stipends to help cover the cost. And then in September, we're doing one in Recruitment Retention out in Arizona. Again, because we have some grant funding behind that, we'll be able to offer some travel stipends before that. So, please consider becoming a member of NVFC, $21 a year. And if you need to go to that, just go to www.nvfc.org/join. Also, make note that the video description, the links will be there, and this is being recorded, so it'll be on the NVFC YouTube channel for later access. If we weren't able to answer your questions, NVFC's communications coordinator, Matthew Odom, at Matthew, common spelling, at nvfc.org is his email address, and he'll make sure that Dave and I get any questions that you have. So again, I want to thank you for being here with us this afternoon. I get you off 1 minute early. So have a good afternoon, and thanks for being here with us.
Be safe.
Thanks, Dave.